Greetings, YouTube. Today I'd like to talk about Mutant Year Zero, a post-apocalyptic game. Let me be up front. I received a copy of this from the writer, from the company that produced it, as a review copy. And I'm going to be going over this in pretty much two parts. The first part I'd like to talk specifically about the game and its mechanics, and the second part I have a personal opinion I'd like to express. So the first bit is I have been stunned how fast this game has achieved popularity in the post-apocalyptic community. I mean, we're not huge, but there are people out there who love post-apocalyptic role-playing games. I know I do. I've got quite a few within my collection. And I really has kind of taken it by storm. Lots of people really like this game. And I can see why. It's got some really solid mechanics, and I like the way it handles quite a few things. Now, this is a translation of a Swedish game, and I'm not going to get no big spoilers here. If you look at the player map, you'll be able to figure out that this thing takes place in the New York City area. Does the Swedish version take place in the US, or does the Swedish version use a map that is in Europe? I'm just curious. I don't know. So this is a dice pool mechanic that uses D6s, and I think that's a smart thing to do because D6s are ubiquitous, though they do suggest using 3 different colors of D6s, but you wouldn't need many of them. You could get away with like 10 of each. In fact, just today I was looking at AC Moore. They had a dice game there called 10 Key or something like that. It was like 13 bucks for like 40 dice. It'd be perfect for this game. They're all different. They're 4 different colors. You can buy special dice designed to be used in this game. They have radiation symbols and little explosion symbols on their base and gear dice, and biohazard rather, and radiation symbols on the 6. So 6 is good, 1s are bad. And you have 3 different pools of dice: your base dice, which are based off of your attributes; your skill dice, which are obviously skills; and then your gear dice. And all of these can stack depending on what you're rolling for. Now, the game uses 4 attributes, and the ones in question are strength, raw physical power, and endurance. Strength is decreased by damage and recovered by grub. Agility, your overall body control and motor skills. Agility is decreased by fatigue and recovered by water. Wits, intelligence, alertness, and sharpness of mind. Wits are decreased by confusion and recovered by sleep. And empathy, your charisma and an ability to read and affect others. Empathy is decreased by doubt and recovered by sympathy. So there is an inherent social interaction mechanic in this game. Now, I really like the fact that each of the attributes has a specific type of stress it represents and a different mechanic for recovering it. I find that much more flavorful and interesting than just a ubiquitous heal. That this is much more interesting, and also it's going to mean that your character is going to have to really marshal and take care of their resources, both the physical resources of food and water, and also making sure your character has access to an ability to sleep safely, and to have interaction with other individuals to gain sympathy to help recover their empathy. I think this is very well done. It made me smile, and those that enjoy the concept of a simple style old school mechanic we're going to like this. And another thing I also like is that all these numbers are low. Unless it's specific to your career path, you have a range of 1 to 4. And each career path has 1 attribute associated with it, and that would let you crank it up to a 5. So if you're an enforcer, for example, you could have a 5 strength, and let's face it, if you're going to play an enforcer, you're going to have a 5 strength. But anyone else in the group could have a 4 strength. For example, you could be playing a chronicler that has a 4 strength. That would be a very unusual chronicler. As the name of the game, Mutant Year Zero, everybody in the game is a mutant. And you start the game with 1 mutation. You can pick a 2nd mutation, but you lose an attribute point. More of that later. What I find interesting is they suggest using a mutant deck. And a mutant deck is a deck of cards. Each card represents 1 mutation from the game. And each person gets to pick 1 card, which means each mutation will only show up in that particular adventuring group once. And only once. Now, from a meta plot point of view, this is interesting. That means that each adventuring group, where these people are come from, the arc, there's probably going to be more than one adventuring group. Each adventuring group will only have an instance of any mutation one time. Has anyone ever noticed this? Has anyone ever said, hey, you know, why is it that there's never two guys with wings in a group? It was just a artifact of the way that they're suggesting you do this. It's up to the GM. You could do it this way because that means you have a lot of flexibility as variety and coverage of different situations, as opposed to having a bunch of people picking all the same thing, which means you may not have as many options available to you out there in the field. You're also going to take you get 14 points, I think. You take the 14 points and you distribute them how you want to between your stats, depending on your career path. You're also going to have skills, and each skill is tied to an attribute. And then, of course, then you can have gear. Now, how all this comes together is that you say you have a high strength and you have a skill in something that lets you move heavy objects. That stacks. So if you get a 5 strength and a 3 in moving heavy objects, I don't actually know what the skill is called at the moment, I apologize. You roll 8 dice. 5 base dice, 3 skill dice. Now, say you had a crowbar, that would give you a +1 gear. Or say it was like one of those fireman's special tools designed for breaking into buildings. That might give you a +2 because it's an artifact from the old days. Okay? So these all things stack. And if you roll well, good things happen. You're going to need at least one positive roll to succeed at all. And if you get more than one, you can do different things. For example, when you're designing a piece of gear, most gear is to assume to have been jury-rigged and doesn't last very long. But if you roll more than one positive result, you could say it has longevity. So instead of building a sled for 2 days, you can build a sled that lasts as long as you need the sled, or until something damages it. So that's a positive thing. But you're thinking, well, what if I roll and don't get what I want? This is where things get gambly. You take out the 1s and 6s, and you can take the rest of the dice that are left, and you can push them, which means you re-roll them. And when that happens, things can get dangerous, because you can hurt yourself. You can blow stuff up. You can also push yourself to the point where you further mutate. And if you further mutate, you get another mutation, draw it from the card, or roll it randomly, however you want to do it. And you lose another attribute point. So as you gain more powers of mutations, it consumes you, which is actually quite evocative and interesting and accurate to what radiation or toxicity can do to you. Consume you. It's also a little bit Goddardammer wrong in my book, but okay. An interesting thing, you can also roll a D66. So you can roll on from like 11 to 66, so you can roll 3 of them and roll 111 to 666. It's kind of interesting mechanic. I don't know if I've ever seen that in a game before. I thought that was quite interesting. Let me scoot ahead here. Here we go. And you're going to be able to play different career paths here. So you have the Enforcer. You get the idea what an Enforcer is. And with each of the career paths, you also get a trait specific to that class. You get to choose from, I guess, like 2 or 3 choices from each one. You get to choose which one you want. And then as you gain more power over time, you can pick new traits. Some are customized to a particular career path, and then some are generic. For example, Rot Cook, which will let you take contaminated food and water and cook it in the field so that it is not contaminated food and water. Every party should have one of them. You have Gearhead, that's kind of self-explanatory. Stalker, who's a specialist in hunting. You have a Fixer, that's the face of the party, the guy that makes the wheels and the deals and knows all the people to talk to and how to push things as far as getting things traded in gear and things like that. Dog Handler, which is exactly what it sounds like, someone who has a strong bond with a canine that they raised, and now they and the canine are inseparable. That becomes a trait, but it's also a separate creature. which is kind of cool. I kind of like the idea. There's a chronicler, and there's the people who keep track of the history and of your arc, and also trying to gather information about the zone around your arc so that you can help improve your arc's survival chances. They're the journalists and the record keepers, the librarians. Then you have the boss. That's also self-explanatory. And then you have the slave, which is someone who is owned by someone else. All right. The skill list is not overly long, which is kind of cool. Again, having that same kind of old school vibe to it. When you want to do a task, say you have a normal chance, you just roll something straight. If the difficulty level is a breeze, you're going to get a +3 bonus to it. And if it's insanely difficult, you get a -3 bonus to it, which means you're going to definitely want to have to push the dice or make sure you have a very high base and very high skill in that with any chance of succeeding with an insane roll. Whereas pretty much anybody could succeed at a breeze type skill. Like, for example, there it is. I apologize. There's a skill, Force, which is a strength base. That's the one I meant, moving heavy stuff, Force. I just couldn't think of the skill. And, for example, Move is a skill, so your character can be better at moving quickly through combat, which is also cool, because I actually enjoy a game that allows you to have more than a standard movement. Like in Pathfinder, D&D, every human moves at a 30. Every human in the whole world! That's weird. At least this means if you want your character to move faster than the average person, you can. Nice option. There is... the section on mutations is nice because they're flexible. Under each mutation, they give you examples of what you can do with them. And those examples, I'm sure, could be expanded upon by a GM if we wanted to, or a creative player. Say, well, if you can do this, this, and this, maybe I can do that. So there is some flexibility to play with in here. Anything else I need to cover specifically? The one negative thing I didn't like about the skill system is that the one thing a GM is not allowed to do if a player gets a negative roll is say nothing happens. That if a player gets a bad roll, something bad has to happen. I'm bothered by a game mechanic that tells the GM that they have to do something. That bugs me on a personal level. It may not bother most people. Cool. If this is not a deal breaker for you, cool, that's fine. But it bothers me when a mechanic in a game tells the GM they have to do something. Maybe that's just, my pedantiness being shown. Now, as I said, all the characters come from the Ark. They're all mutants. They're also all sterile. This is one of the mysteries that you're going to have to uncover. And the Ark is kind of in a bad state because food's running out, preserved food from before the war, and they need to make sure that there's a new supply out there they can bring in, and also you need to help improve the Ark to increase the survivability of your community. And there are some wonderful rules in here for going on missions that improve your Ark's survivability. And they stack. So if you want a library, you have to have first established another mission. And some, of course, base missions, and then base missions you build upon them. But things like a windmill, power generator, finding an armory, finding maps that will help you understand what's going on in the world around you. And you can do things like encounter, of course, all kinds of mutants and things like that, but there's weather risks. There's other arcs out there. You're going to encounter them. There are rot ghouls. There are lots of different things that your adventurers are going to encounter when they're out there in the field trying to find the things that your arc needs to survive, including the mystery of why you are all sterile and how do you overcome that. There's a trait in here called Corpse Eater. Yeah, that's a thing. Humans, by the way, are worth 2 grub points. And I have to say, the whole design for the different zones that exist around your arc is top-notch. this is very well done. The bestiary is also very nice and gives you enough selection that any GM worth their name could use it as a springboard for creating their own mutants of some variety. Toning things down or up depending on the strength of the party, and mixing things up as you wish. Because let's face it, in a mutant world full of mutations, there's going to be a lot of variety within any single species that you're going to encounter. And remember, the shorter the gestation cycle, the more likely you're going to have mutations. So insects and many plants are going to have more mutations than the larger animal types you're going to find in North America. Now, one thing in here that's interesting is that you can start the game with a bow. And you also can start the game with a gun, a scrap gun, you know, a zip gun, essentially. But the currency in the game is bullets. So I can't figure out why anyone would want a gun starting with. Because a gearhead can make disposable arrows for your bow. And you can't make bullets. So to me, in my mind, a starting group should have no guns in it and should have nothing but bows. Because you can make the ammo in the field. It doesn't have to be permanent ammo. It's disposable anyway. So it, to me, makes more sense from a resource point of view to just go with bows. Also, there were no stats for basic crossbows. There's an artifact crossbow in here, which is fine. But there are no stats for basic crossbows, and I think there should be. If you can make a zip gun, you can make a good quality, dependable crossbow that is just as dependable as the bows the party has. And they're easier to train someone to use, and they can be carried while loaded. Only don't want to drop into things, but I think they have a place in the game. It kind of surprised me that they were not present in the setting. But again, you could whip one of those off the top of your head in a second. If I were to look at the stats again on bows, I could do it right now if I wanted to. Again, everything in here is very stripped down. Again, that very simple, back to basic, old school vibe is very much present in this product, even though it is a 21st century product. Though I actually don't know when the original Swedish game came out. Is it all 21st century? I don't know how old the Swedish version is. There are also rules in here for building your arcs. In case you want a specific location, you don't want to necessarily just use the default one they hand you. Now, one thing I found interesting about this is that the way this is talked about and the technology that is presented to you, the war would have had to take place 30 to 40 years from now. And it can't be more than 2 generations after that. So you're talking 2045, 2075, 2085, which is about when the whole game is going to launch. And the person that runs your arc is known as the Elder, and they're fairly old, but they're old enough to have remembered our times. So that means they're alive today. Now, to me, that's kind of interesting. You've still got someone from this world kicking around, and with a certain level of knowledge, even though they are getting older and they're becoming feeble. In fact, there's a quote in here, someone complaining about the fact that they're so old they can't even take care of their own bodily waste any longer. So someone that's definitely getting into senility range, inability to take care of themselves. So what is that going to do to the arc? When the Elder finally goes, who's going to take over? So you're talking about the potential for internal strife on that level as well, which is a whole nother possibility of story-driven information. I can see why this game is popular. Now, I realize that I am glossing over some of the content in the game, and I apologize. I read it through thoroughly once, and I've skimmed it since then. But the game mechanics are, to my mind, very straightforward, and you're not going to have any difficulty understanding them. The setting is interesting. It is got everything you need to run this campaign in this one book. I love the whole way they've done the zone exploration and the building the zones, and how the missions you go out there to bring the resources you can then come back to bring to your arc and make your arc better and increase its survival rate. And the fact that there's a meta plot which then helps you figure out the past of your arc and figure out how to make sure that your arc continues. Because while you are the spiritual grandchildren of the Elder, there's not going to be anybody else unless you can figure out how to fix that. And that is cool to my mind. This whole thing is very interesting. Now comes the one part that I have a problem with, and this is the personal opinion piece. So if you wanted to not continue, go ahead. There's one aspect about this product that I really didn't like. One of the job career paths in this game is slave. Slave isn't a career path. Slave is a social status. If you went into Georgia in 1850 to buy a slave, you didn't buy a slave. You bought a carpenter, or a cook, or a smith, or a farrier, or a field hand that also happened to be a slave. Slave is not a job. It is a social status. And slave denotes a slave owner. Now, your characters leave the arc to go out in the field to find the things your arc needs to survive, which means the slave is going out into the field with you, which means one of two things. One of the other player characters owns the other player character. So the slave owner is in the party and the slave is in the party. Or the player characters that are not the slave owners are representing the slave owner, which is staying back in the arc while they ship out their slave with the group. I find this entire concept morally repugnant. Now, I'm not saying slavery shouldn't exist in your post-apocalyptic setting. It most definitely should. I'm saying that it should be something only the bad guys do. And it definitely should not be something practiced by the player characters, either directly, as one player character owning another player character, or indirectly by the player characters being the representative of the slave owner back at the arc. Because I gotta tell you, if I'm a member of an arc that has slavery, my first mission, I'm never coming back. I'm going that way, and I'm just gonna keep right on trucking. Because any colony, any arc that has slavery as part of its institution is not worth improving or saving. It also means that the person that is the elder in that arc, that as soon as the world ended, one of the first institutions they put into place was slavery. Because remember, that all the player characters in this group, in this game, think slavery is normal. So it isn't a new thing. This has been around for their entire lives. Which means slavery has existed from the moment they were born, before they were born. So the moment the world ended, boom, the Elder recreated slavery. Who would want to be in an arc where that is the norm? And lastly, what is a slave doing for you in the field? You're not going to give them a weapon. And since the slave is just a generic slave, I'm assuming they're just labor. They're brute force labor. Why do I want a brute force laborer in my adventure party in the field? I want another stalker. Or I want another dog handler. Or I want another gearhead. Probably don't want another boss, they'd fight. But I don't want a slave in the field. I don't want a slave at all. Now, I don't understand how the writers of the game wrapped their head around the concept of slavery and thought of it as a job as opposed to a social status. I don't get that. And that's my big foible with this game. And lastly, this is a very dark game. Your characters are going to consume themselves in their careers. I could see this being a generational campaign where you finally figure out how to have next generation, and you play one generation after another, building each one upon the other, till eventually your arc can be completely functional and sustainable society that will go into the future. Because I can't see you having a long career as you get more and more mutations and your body is slowly consumed by them. I read something online not long ago where the author had said that they were trying not to create a grim, dark game. But from my reading of the game, it's a grim, dark game. It's like Call of Cthulhu. There aren't a lot of positive results in this for those player characters. Positive results for the art, yes. So in that regard, it isn't a grim, dark game. The art can be made better and continue in the future, but your player characters are not. They're going to be consumed by the rot and by the mutations. Which, again, is a relatively realistic look at, damage to your genetic structure over time through toxicity and radiation. So they nailed that, and kudos for that. So there's a lot to love about this game. I have a real problem with the slavery thing. A lot of problems. I would not use it in the arc that the player characters were from. It would be something done by the bad guys out there. It would be something that the player characters fought against. That they would gain social status in the surrounding communities because they would be fighting against the institution of slavery. I want player characters, even doomed player characters, to be heroes and not slavers. So there you have it. There's my skimming of the game's mechanics and my overall view of the system. I think it's a solid game. It's very popular with good reason. I just don't like the very problematic aspect of slavery in the game. To me, it really seems to detract from the otherwise fully consistent quality in this. The art is good. The layout is good. It's a solid product. I just really wish that the whole slavery thing had not been included. So, there is my very long-winded thoughts on Mutant Year Zero. I hope that the creators don't mind my thoughts on it, and I'm looking forward to people giving me feedback on what their experience has been with it. Again, it's a good product. If you like this type of a setting and you're into post-apocalyptic games, I think this is something you're really going to have to add to your collection. I have the PDF version. I believe it's also available in print. And there's just something about a book. You know what I mean? Something about a book in your hand. That's always cool. So, let me hear your thoughts. What do you think about Mutant Year Zero? And how do you feel about the institution of slavery in your role-playing games?